kind of along a similar that vein of one of the goals that that you as a dean and us as a school kind of were hoping for and are working towards being making architecture accessible in that way. Another one of those bigger goals was to promote more diversity and inclusion and equity in architecture and design, and specifically in design education. So what do you think as a whole, as a culture of architecture and design, we can do to be doing that? And is there like more maybe microcosmically, according to UT, is there some kind of steps that you think we are taking or should be taking further to further improve that?
Well, this is something where I think that we have an opportunity to be, you know, an incredible leader in this. And it has to do with the nature of our professions. So yeah, this is, you know, as it is pretty much around our country and many parts of the world, everybody's talking about it as if it's about numbers and representation. But I see it from a different standpoint, in that it is diversity and inclusion aren't about sort of like taking the way we do things and slightly shifting the demographics. That's missing the entire point of diversity and inclusion. That what we have is this unbelievable opportunity to question the way that we do things, to question how we define. Right now we're looking at making sure more people feel like they fit in. No, we should be thinking about how we redesign the entire thing. So we're not here to make sure that we have more space for people. We're here to completely redesign what the territory is so that everybody walks on that territory, not only equally, but that territory or that landscape changes because of the way other people think about things. I think about, being the only woman engineer for a very long period of time. And I constantly was reminded of when I fit in or when I didn't fit in. And I still hear those words. I still hear those words often when people talk about perhaps, an applicant of color, someone who might come, from not the same kind of socioeconomic background as whatever the majority is. And I'm thinking, why do those of us of a certain background own the definition of what things should be? So what makes our field really special and a great opportunity is that the thing about the design fields of the built environment is they have really narrow origins. Everything that we deal with comes from Western Europe. The way that we have precedents for good city design, Barcelona, Paris, every single thing that we look at comes from those origins. The way that we teach interior design and architecture comes straight out of Western Europe. So it was a number of years ago, and it was quite some time ago, that there was some pushback on that. And the way the pushback resulted was that, they added some Japanese examples. So we're going to be non-Western because we're going to have a few Japanese examples. But they were also from Japanese architects who had been trained at Harvard. It really never sort of shifted from that. So this sort of question about non-Western took hold here at the University of Texas many, many years ago, when they started sort of questioning, the architecture of the Americas, particularly of Latin America. That everyone assumes that all the great architecture of Latin America, didn't matter whether it was of the colonial period or of the modern period, were still derivative. So is this school that really began to question, actually there's a very different approach to building in the Americas than we see there. And it's an approach that has never been really foregrounded or understood. So through that, it's starting to sort of expand and crack open what it is to sort of think about the precedents, the values, the ideas that we have. And that the leadership in doing that all came from Latinx researchers. Interesting enough, when it comes to women completely known in architecture were the ones who started the sustainability movement in architecture. And also the most bizarre thing, if you can imagine, is that it's almost entirely women who do advanced technologies in architecture. And so someone once said to me, that, well, that's because women were pushed to the fringes. So they had to operate in those unusual fields. And my counter to it is no, it's actually because in order to pursue fields like this, you're already somebody who thinks outside the box, and it's the thinking outside the box that gets you to look at these other things. So it is by being more diverse that we actually are rethinking our entire profession. That's what diversity will do for us. It'll get us out of this sort of lockstep of having followed this narrow tradition for 2,000 years and make us realize the field is much bigger, but the opportunities for our field are incredible when we become more diverse and inclusive. And that's the part that everybody should be so excited about, that we could get to that.
People always talk about numbers and not actually like how the content of what you're doing and the method of what you're doing has to shift. So that's really refreshing to hear.
I mean, you look at some of the diversity like statistics and numbers for it in some of the there's a bunch of information online that we had access to at one point, I guess even is public information. And like you're saying, like the status quo just kind of is this lockstep, like it hasn't changed. Like you can try and do this whole increasing of quotas by saying, oh no, we are going to admit more Black students or more Latinx students or more students of color or more students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. But if you don't give them a reason to want to come here, that's going to change anything, right? Then what incentive do they have to want to come here if everything is the same, but you're just telling them that we need you to fill some number for us, right? It does nobody any good to do it that way. So the massive cultural shift that you're talking about is actually very exciting to think that such a powerhouse in this field like UT is thinking about this and being so conscious of it, and it's very refreshing to hear as a student. So
similarly, on the vein of like how this profession changes, but maybe in a different area, like we're living in such a weird time period right now. There's so many, to use the hated word of unprecedented changes that are all happening now. I'm interested to know how you see like the direction and practice of architecture, both as a field, but also like in the educational realm. How might it change in response to all these different things that we've been experiencing?
So many different thoughts that come up on this, and in so many different ways. And this really relates to this previous question about diversity and inclusion. Really wasn't until I left the Ivy League that I realized the Ivy League was part of this in controlling this tiny, narrow definition, and closed definition of what these fields were. And, if you had asked me 5 or 10 years ago, what I thought about the field and what I thought was important for people to study, I used to think, you need to build a high-powered network. So students, make sure you take a studio with a star architect, so you got those connections, and make sure you intern with somebody famous, so you have those connections, because those connections will mean everything. And it really was leading it that I realized that that's such a tiny part of the world, and telling people to make their connections within that tiny part was actually just causing it to shrink and become more insular than it was to go beyond. And so if I think about that, particularly in relationship to the pandemic, one of the interesting things about our field, and I think it's another place where we can be a model or a game changer out there is that, and this is something that came from young designers during the last recession, the rapid expansion in our digital tools. And the fact that we have certain sort of strategies in modeling and building information modeling is one of them. You all, I don't believe in your first year would have come across building information modeling, but building information modeling is a way of taking a universal platform so that everybody everywhere in the world can work on the same building. And and it was done for different reasons a long time ago. But during the pandemic, what I discovered is this was a way that very little had to change at firms, when they went online, because they were all working in this building information modeling environment, which meant they all had this shared platform and they could connect in any way. So that's sort of the technical apparatus of it. But I'm thinking of it as well as sort of a much larger kind of framework for how we engage different people at different times on different aspects and in different conversations, no matter where they are or no matter what their circumstances are. That if we have a platform like this that enables us to do a complex building with hundreds of people throughout the world working simultaneously on that, can we also think about that as our platform of exchange, of communication, of idea generation? Can we take that and build on that? We touched tiny bits of it, during the pandemic. Obviously the lecture series and the fact that we can watch anybody's lecture series is a little bit of a start. There have been some more conversations on there, but we haven't coordinated all of this. Like, what would this look like if we began to realize that we should have two organizations or two platforms operating simultaneously? What we consider is our digital family. What does our digital virtual family look like in terms of the people we share ideas with and we communicate with? And then what does our cohort, look like? And that we want to build both of those. Normally in design schools, we build our cohort, and it's our studio cohort. And I think one of the things that's kind of magical, and why we are the luckiest people, of anybody studying anything, is those cohorts are for life. You stay close to those cohorts for life. You build those bonds. So how do we build those kinds of physical bonds? How do we build the virtual bonds? How do we begin to work with that together? And I think that we better not lose the fact that there's many things that we can get from those virtual bonds and that virtual network. And it should look different. I don't think it's the same thing to have your physical studio cohort and then the same cohort as a virtual cohort. Yeah, there's things that just work better when you're talking to each other and with each other and looking over each other's shoulders, or, as it was when I was in design school, building models together, drawing on each other's drawings, helping each other out. There's something about that we want to keep, but we've got to figure out actually now how we want to design the other network, that big virtual network, because that connects us to the things that in the Ivy League you used to get by being physically next to, Frank Gehry or someone like that, because you could talk to him every day. We can start building those networks virtually. So I'm really excited about how we do that. But I think we're just figuring pieces of it out. So we can't just say we're back to normal or we're back to, we got to keep part of it. But we've also got to nurture what we have that is in person. Really, really treasure that, because it is a treasure.
So I'd gone to a couple of these architecture camps in the summers between high school grades. And like we did pinups and we had desk crits and we built sketch models and study models and we had tight turnaround times. And it was like, you know, they were trying to give you that, you know, first semester of an undergraduate experience in like a 6 or 8 week like compacting. And it was like, just like the pressure was on to just do the best you could. And there's some aspect of that environment and being there with all those people that I know, and since I have experience with, I understood how important it would be coming into it this year, especially with it being, you know, unprecedentedly different, right, as we love to refer to it as. And I have to say, it's been a positive experience being in Studio U. The few people that do come, and we've seen more people have been coming this semester so far up to the attic in Sutton. It's been a really positive experience for us to be there with each other, see each other in real time, you know, like you said, be able to draw on each other's work and manipulate each other's models. And there's aspects of all these things where that network that you build there in a physical space is in many ways different than that virtual one and the one that we are kind of being introduced to now. But that amalgamation of the two is really where the crux of the importance actually lies, right? And I guess that's what we're going to come to at the, maybe now kind of at the end of the pandemic, as well as like, what can we take from both of these experiences and just fuse them into like this ultra hybrid combination of like amazingness. And I think it'll be really cool to see what that turns into, at least.
You all are fluid in all of these sort of like other means of connecting with other people. And so I think that this is something where you can help us design what this virtual connection really needs to be meaningful, productive, but also really imaginative.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting being on the flip side, I think, compared to Rohan. I've never had, well, I had like art studio experience. I've never had the same type of studio experience prior to college. And then now that I'm studying remotely, it is very weird because I don't have that same connection to people at all times while I'm working. But then I can also see the potential of building these types of systems, because I've been really lucky to have a group, including Rohan, that have been very, very like good about reaching out and including me in that circle. So I think that's actually one of the things I've been kind of thinking about ever since last semester, is like, how can we provide that for everyone else who might not have a group that's also reaching out to them. Yeah.
And I think in some ways there's another piece of this that we should be taking out, and I think it connects to, you know, your earlier questions about accessibility. We should find opportunities to bring our education out. It could be really amazing for someone to have an opportunity to take a couple of studios. It could be really amazing for someone to sit in one of our world history classes. This can enrich, you know, many people's lives, but it can also give them sort of a sense as to whether or not they find this sort of exciting or intriguing. They might be able to do part of their education in a way that if they don't have to be here, there's a lot of costs that they don't have to bear. So I do think there's broader ways of thinking about making things more accessible, but the being online this year tells us we could actually extend who has an opportunity in many different ways. Yeah. It's interesting to me that the design professions really haven't ever sort of gone that route, and it's time for them. They've always been a little bit elitist. And I think it's time for us to start going that route too.